So thank you everyone for joining our webinar. So through this, in this session, I'm going to take you through our managed service offering for carbon emissions accounting. So I'm going to split this demo up into three sections. So the first section is setting up the system. The second section is data collection and imports. And the third section is the outputs. So let's start with setting up the system. So at the beginning of our managed service offering, our EAS consultants or team thereof will sit together with your organization and undergo a series of exercises and workshops that will allow us to develop a value chain of your organization, both internally and externally. So this process is entirely adherent to the GHG protocol as well as ISO. And at the end of it, we're able to get things like your organizational structure to set up the system, as well as the activities that you need to account for. So if we go onto the screen right now and we look at boundaries and organizational units, you'll see here we are able to set up your organization. And this is highly customizable as well as scalable. So any number of levels according to how your organization is structured. If we go to activity categories, we see that we can select which emissions that your organization has to account for. So this is comprehensive, all 4 categories in scope 1, all 2 in scope 2, and all 15 in scope 3. So yeah, you can see both upstream and downstream in scope 3. In terms of emission factors, if we come in here, so the system has in place a number of built-in emission factor data sets, and here we select based on activities the data sets that the emission factors should be pulled out for that activity. If I go onto factor library, you can see there's a very large set of emission factor databases, and typically each one is used for different applications. For example, if we look at Axiobase is very oriented towards spend-based emissions. So if you have transactional data, we would often use Axiobase. The IEA looks at the IEA allows you to calculate scope 2 emissions, and it has emission factors for utilities across the globe. Okay, so that's on setting up the system. So now we're at a point where the system is set up for your organization, and what remains now is that we need to bring in data into the system. Again, through a series of exercises and workshops with EAS and your team, we sit together and we are able to then undergo a data assessment gathering phase, followed by data cleaning and compilation phase, where we look at the types of data you have available to enable emissions calculations, and then structure this according to the different activities that you have to account for. Once this is set up, we can directly import these data sets into the system. As you import these data sets into the system, the emissions calculations are done automatically, and as soon as the data becomes available. So quickly, I'm just going to show you the import functionality. You see we have to select the reporting period as well as factor mapping. So here we're going to map by keyword and detail. There's also a list of factors that you can map by. And as an example, I prepared a dummy data set for scope 1, mobile combustion. So mobile combustion is basically your vehicles in your organization that you own or control and the fuel that it uses. So I select this and select my input dummy input set, sorry. Okay, we see that,
Sorry, while
there's a
you're
preview.
Sorry, Malcolm, if I may interject. I saw someone, Belinda, raising her hand. So we are happy to answer the questions, but can you please put them in the chat or in the Q&A? And I think that's much easier than if there are questions, and we'll try to answer them as part of the webinar. Thank you.
Good for that. So we see that there's a preview of the spreadsheet that you've uploaded just to ensure that it's the correct one. Then as with any data exercises, there's some validity checks that need to be done. So if we look at the columns in what we've uploaded versus what we require, you can see that certain ones are not matched. So very efficiently, we can just go select fuel type as our keyword and our unit column as the unit of consumption. As the data is uploaded, all of the data is validated, so it checks if spellings are correct, if it is paired with an emission factor, if the date formats or data structures are formatted correctly, and tells you where there are errors. If there are errors, then it shows up as orange and you're able to correct it. Okay. Once you start importing that, the calculations take place simultaneously. At the end of this, you'll be able to see that for those line items that I've uploaded, the emissions show on the far right. You can see that the emissions for these line items are calculated. So this is when all the data is compiled and available. So sometimes there will exist a situation where the data sits with one specific person in an organization, or you require information from your suppliers. So what we've done is built in a system where we can request that data. So what you do is you add this activity into your inventory, and when you go into request, it allows you to directly ask that person for that piece of information. It sends them a template file as well as an upload link. So the person can fill out that template file and then upload it. And once it's uploaded into the system pulls it in and does the emissions calculations. Okay. Just briefly, I'd like to mention the AI import beta version that we have here. So Kurt's mentioned it prior in the presentation. And this functionality will allow for the scraping of data from invoices or files or receipt files that you have. Okay. So now all of the data exists within the system and all calculations have been done. We move towards what we get out of the system. So if we look at dashboard, sorry, I'm just having a bit of a network issue. Give me a second.
Yeah, there is a big storm coming over Johannesburg at this stage. So maybe, Malcolm, if you can switch off your camera, that can free up some bandwidth. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yeah, it was an internet connectivity issue. Okay, so if we look at the dashboard, we see that it offers a emissions profile across scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, as well as a total view. If we look at the graphics that it shows you your distribution of your emissions for that year, as well as the distributions of your emissions year on year. If you go further down, there's some statistical information on the calculations for each activity group. So scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. And there's also a view of the distributions of emissions across your organizational units. So for easy comparisons to identify hotspots. If we go into Pivot, it's just loading. So Pivot's a great feature for analyzing the data. It allows us to slice and dice the data in whatever way we want. So if we select a few categories on the side, I'm going to select activity group and activity category. There is a network issue, so it's not loading, but you'll be able to see the views that you've selected here in terms of sums and averages, as well as across different years or different organizational units. It also allows you to download this directly into a spreadsheet format or a CSV format for your own analysis externally. In the compare functionality, it allows you one of two views. So the first view is basically a year-on-year comparison. So you can look at 2023 versus 2024 to see how your emissions compare, or it allows for a organizational unit view to see how your subsidiaries or your holding company compares to operating unit. If we look at benchmarking, so I'm just going to briefly mention what this is. So this will be able to give you, when the final version is out, how you relate to similar organizations, similar in terms of location as well as industry. Okay, so that's on the data outputs. If we go to targets, so this section is fully aligned to the SBTi. So the SBTi has a set of rules that you have to adhere to in order to be considered compliant with them. And they basically set out pathways that organizations need to take in order to reach net zero or reduce their emissions. You can see here we can set up the very specifications required by the SBTi. And as you select that, your targets are automatically calculated on year, and it shows you by how much your emissions should be reduced by your target year in order to be compliant with the SBTi. Okay, so this section can also be superimposed in the next section, which is a very interesting section. So this is the simulation section. So some organizations already have pathways towards reducing their emissions or already are on the road towards a net zero, or could also be taking actions or could also be thinking about taking actions to reduce their emissions. So what this section does is basically looks at this different decarbonization strategies you can employ and see how that would affect your emission profiles through the year. So if we look at business growth, so I said that this business is going to grow 10% per year between 2027 and 2033. And because of that growth, all emission-related activities would also increase. I've also put a decarbonization strategy of electrifying your fleet, and we're going to reduce our internal combustion engine vehicles by 50% by the target year. I've also have an example of reducing intercontinental flights, and there's a waste reduction example here. If I run the simulation on the decarbonization strategies, and we say view graphs, it shows us how our emissions profiles would look if we employ those decarbonization strategies while accounting for business growth. We can also superimpose the science-based targets on it, and it shows us how it compares, how your decarbonization strategies would compare to what the SBTi has defined your reductions to be in order to be aligned with them. On the right, we can see the specific emissions reductions per decarbonization activities. So we see electrifying the fleet has the most effect. Okay, so that's it from my side. Kurt, do you want to come back in?
Okay, thank you very much, Malcolm.